Like, what are all the things that you're doing right now that you find helpful as like allies and tools?
Mm. We've talked about this some before too, but so the right now I think the big I generally have like a spiritual practice is probably the best way you could put it. I generally have a set of practices. I think I have a spiritual practice. I have a more like physical health practice, and then I guess you can kind of throw sleep into that mix a bit too. And so I generally I try to just like have like this is the system that I'm running roughly, and then I iterate on the system.
The human being is a fluid thing. What
Yeah,
might work on one day might not work the second day. But it's great to have an example. So if anyone's interested, they can just try out the system and see if it works. But I found
yeah.
that like this base model of waking up early, connecting with your mind, connecting with your energy, doing some journaling, doing some movement, general buckets like that tend to be very, very popular among people.
I am the one of the co-founders of an early stage software startup, good old fashioned B2B software called taxwire.com. We help companies that sell and operate across multiple states and countries deal with. I think it took me a while to build up my confidence enough to really feel like I could go for it. I think part of getting ready to start a company is like all the blocking and tackling of just having skills and network and whatever. But a big part for me actually was like building up sufficient belief. And so anyway, I've worked on myself a lot over the years to do all of those things and do them better, especially on the being more confident, being more self-aware.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Evergrowing. This is a show where we talk about inner growth for leaders. If you don't know about me, my name is Sabrina. I'm an executive coach. I work with leaders and CEOs on a day-to-day basis, and this show is really my attempt to bring out some of the most valuable learnings that I see in my coaching. So today we have a very special interview. I'm talking with a CEO that I've been working with, Andrew, and he's one of the most hardworking CEOs that I know. He works super hard on his personal growth. He works super hard on his business. And he's got experience as a founder, as an investor, and he's also building a personal brand. So he does a lot of content that's very thought-provoking. So I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But how does that sound for a general plan? And of course, we'll go with the flow.
Yeah, works for me.
Okay. So, I mean, this season, I have really loved this question, which is, what is a version of your life story that you love to tell?
A version of my life story that I love to tell. I think I've weaponized my life story so much that I almost, in a weird way, it almost becomes this like abstract thing because it's like, well, what do I need the story to do for me effectively today versus what is like actually, it's like not that it's not even true, but what you emphasize changes. And so I think this is a rambling way of actually getting to your question, but I think it changes what you almost end up with a weird relationship, at least I have, of with what even is your life story. So I honestly I think I bring all that up to say I feel like I'm in that spot now where I just like I'm literally like I
Mm,
probably used four different versions of it today already. Just with
mm.
like because I've had customer calls, I've had recruiting calls, I've had like I it wasn't an investor, a usual investor, it was kind of investor-ish. Um and so for each of those you're using something slightly different. And then there's the way I think about it to myself. So I guess the as unified as I can get is that I think by like American standards at least, I had humble beginnings. I had humble beginnings, not easy childhood, not traditional background for at least like the people I'm around and things I do now. I think for better or worse, that influenced a lot of why I am wired the way I am wired and why I do the things that I do. And so I kind of like don't hide from sharing those things. So like I grew up like small town, rural, poor, working class Ohio. Kind of was in a very, very deeply religious community. Lots of I guess unique things that come out of that background. And I'd say generally partially because of like that just growing up there and then partially because of just some other like life being life. I'd say my childhood was not easy, not fun in the usual sense. And so I had to grow up very quickly. I started working very young, and I have basically since really like I was about 15 or 16 worked eight full time, probably more full time than most people do, largely in the goal of doing something greater than myself with my life and just like selfishly getting out of that environment. And that is probably where my passion for work comes from. That is where a lot of my drive probably comes from. And that pathway was just a lot of like beating against the proverbial brick wall until I figured out something, often not really knowing what I was doing, but just having like a vague sense of like better and more. And eventually that led to getting into tech, entrepreneurship, starting a company. That company didn't really work out, and then I've kind of just like done things in the startup world ever since then, ultimately leading to starting this current company. But yeah, I think everything I have done and do with my life kind of stems from like where, again, for it's kind of cliche too, but like just where I come from. I don't think I would be the way I am or see the world the way I do if it wasn't for that. So yeah,
Yeah. And obviously, we come from very different backgrounds, but I always think that this,
yeah,
like at least the story that you tell, I resonate a lot personally because I also came from an environment growing up in China where I felt like I really didn't fit in. There were aspects of my childhood where I felt like I really, really just needed to be the opposite of that. And it's almost as if, like, obviously now we both, I think, have achieved a certain level of success that we both feel like would never be possible for the younger self. Like it would just be out of my wildest dreams to have the life that I have right now. But it's, I think that there's this sense of I think it's commitment. I think there's this drive of like I'm so committed to be the best version of myself for me because I know what it's like to not feel like me. And that I really feel that from your story. It's like once you have gone through that and once that you see that you can create your life, it almost becomes addictive. And everything less than becomes kind of hard to tolerate to some extent.
yeah, I think that's fair. I think where I think where I think whatever, I don't think most people, anybody that's just never satisfied and always doing more and chasing something, there's some level of inherent dissatisfaction in that, no matter what story you try to paint around in that. And yeah, I don't, I think ideally, and I think you do a lot of work here. I think a lot, you work with a lot of people that are trying to blend maybe some very unhealth or unhealthy, or at least the relationship with these things being unhealthy, core motivators
Yeah.
with something, I guess, a little more sustainable. Like I think you work with a lot of people that are probably trying to do some version of that. But
Yeah.
I think if you didn't have that like core thing that maybe makes
Yeah.
someone unhappy some of the time, like if they didn't have that like source of, I don't know if it's trauma, it's a pissed off sense at the world, like whatever it is, it's, I think if you don't have that either, I like question if you end up being one of those people that's like constantly dissatisfied and always like pushing the bounds of things. Because I something
Yeah.
I've experienced is just that most, and you probably have too, most people are actually pretty satisfied with like, especially if they
Yeah.
get like even just like a, I don't know, like their aims and the things it takes to satisfy them is not necessarily that
Yeah.
grand. So,
Yeah.
and like, and once people get those things, they're like satisfied. And so and then
Yeah.
there's some of us that are just not easily satisfied.
I 100% agree with that. It's a superpower. It's a gift. It was hard. It's painful to have some of these things. I think what we're talking about is like obstacles, really, really deep obstacles that have happened. But it gives you a new perspective on life, and it does gives you that drive, and you're not satisfied with the status quo. And I this is how I at least thought about it. Like I used to tell like people, even when I was in my teenage years, people are like, "Oh, why are you working so hard on yourself? Like, why are you meditating?" Like back in college, ain't nobody be meditating at that age. But for me at the time, I was like, I had no choice. I had no choice but to learn about myself and to grow and meditate and work on these things because if I didn't, I would plow to the deep end and I know what that's like. So it's like if you choose the worst and what the potential could be, of course I'm going to choose the potential every single time.
How old were you when you actually started experimenting with meditation?
Oh my gosh. So my first experience with meditation, I don't think I told you this, but I was in college. I took a yoga class. I was probably a sophomore or a junior. So I entered college at 16. So I was maybe 17, 18 years old. And I was like, yoga class, great, relaxation, stretching, it feels good. And then the teacher basically put us into the Shavasana position. And then she would guide a meditation without saying that, oh, we're going to meditate. She would just start to say, notice your feet, notice this, notice that. And it would go on for 15, 30 minutes. And I had this distinct memory of leaving the classroom and I was looking at the trees and hearing the birds and seeing the sky. And I had this clear sense of mind. and I wasn't so bogged down by anxiety anymore. So then I was like, what is this? I got into the Headspace app, which ultimately made me want to like work for Headspace and all the other things that I did. But yeah, that was my first experience with meditation. I didn't even know I was meditating.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. So you didn't have some like people meditate and therefore I should try this meditation thing and see if that works in your head. It was almost incidental.
Yeah, no one was meditating around me. Um, yeah, what about you? Because I know you meditate. What got you into it?
I don't remember when I first became aware that it was a thing. Um, but I've generally been interested in some form of self-improvement, but specific to managing your psychology and your mind. I think I probably got into the psychology and philosophy stuff first. And at some point you definitely become aware that like people meditate. I also did yoga and so probably got a little more exposure to it through that, but I don't think I ever meditated through it. And then I think probably at some point I just was struggling to manage all of it amidst the chaos. I was just like, I'm going to try this meditation thing where people, oh, and it was probably one of like, I read a few books like Power of Now,
Mm.
stillness is key, or like there are a few like very like introductory to like Buddhist type philosophy or westernized Buddhist philosophy books when I was maybe like 23, 22, something like that. And so I think that was the first time I probably tried it. And then I've like tried various forms since then, most of which I've struggled with mildly. But yeah.
Okay. So it's also in a way of trying to understand yourself and then just trying to explore what tools work for you. And you stumbled upon this, and these are some of the things that you do. Maybe say a little bit more about like what are all the things that you're doing right now that you find helpful as like allies and tools?
Mm. We've talked about this some before too, but so the right now I think the big I generally have like a spiritual practice is probably the best way you could put it. I generally have a set of practices. I think I have a spiritual practice. I have a more like physical health practice, and then I guess you could kind of throw sleep into that mix a bit too. And so I generally I try to just like have like this is the system that I'm running roughly, and then I iterate on the system. And so
Mm,
for spiritually specifically, I my current one is that I get up. I try to get up as early as possible, like 6:30 ish. I shortly after getting up I usually also work out in the morning, so I kind of stretch just to get myself going. Make coffee because like I'm an addict, and then that's not related to the spiritual practice. It's just it's more of incidental. But and then I try to stretching also can get quasi meditational, and so it's like it's a good wake up routine too. And then I'll usually I've iterated on the specifics here a bunch, but I'll meditate usually right away, like right around then for like 10 to 15 minutes. And then I will do, and I've been mostly doing like yoga nidra or like my own version of yoga nidra specifically, or another thing I've heard it called is like non-sleep deep rest. Pick your term. And then after that, I will usually do some kind of like quick journaling slash intention setting, which sounds very almost like odd unless you're like really into this stuff, but it works to enough of an extent that I'm continuing to play with it. And then that's maybe like another 5 minutes, and then I will usually just go work out right after that, and that's
yeah,
my ref routine right
that's
now.
good. I love that you call it a system. By the way, I don't think it's odd anymore. It's so mainstream. I hear so many founders,
Fair.
I see leaders wanting to do intention setting, wanting to do journaling, wanting to do reflections because it there is so much going on in your world constantly. Once you get to work, that time in the morning or that time at night, whenever someone picks it to be, to kind of download your thoughts and process your thoughts is so valuable. And I like that you gave a step by step process. I think that the most important thing is to find out what works for one person, and like you said, to iterate on it because the human being is a fluid thing. What
Yeah.
might work on one day might not work the second day. But it's great to have an example, so if anyone's interested they can just try out the system and see if it works. But I found
Yeah.
that like this base model of waking up early, connecting with your mind, like connecting with your energy, doing some journaling, doing some movement, general buckets like that tend to be very, very popular among people.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And if I had to add anything to that, because you brought up the point of like trying things other people do, I also usually on my commute, or I might do this in the evening, but I usually read something, even if it's like 10 pages of like a
Mm,
spiritual or like maybe more spiritual philosophy or even psychology sometimes oriented book. I've usually got at least one or two open at all times.
yeah.
Um, And so the reason I mentioned that is I have tried a lot of things that other people do in
Yeah.
my own system, and like often it just doesn't work or it doesn't work at that time for me. But
Yeah.
I've found it is helpful though to just like study of varying types, like whether it's philosophy, spirituality, even like performance athletics is really interesting because they're very into like try some of them at least are very into trying that stuff, and so there's usually something interesting that might end up resonating even in surprising places.
I want to highlight like all of this is the investment that you're making in yourself. It's you are basically acting out this assumption and this hypothesis that if I work on myself, it will help everything that I do. It'll help my business, and it doesn't really matter what I think what work you're doing. I actually want you to talk about your work a little bit because what the company does has nothing to do with the stuff that you're reading, but somehow it connects together. So maybe you can just
Yeah.
say a little bit about the company, where it's at, and how are you finding some of these things be helpful or maybe not so helpful?
Yeah. Great question. I would say so. I am the one of the co-founders of an early stage software startup, good old fashioned B2B software called taxwire.com. We help companies that sell and operate across multiple states and countries deal with sales tax, VAT tax, GST tax compliance. So basically, anytime you like sell a product or service that is taxable, we help people make sure they're calculating the right rate, register in the right place, understand when they're even supposed to do any of these things in the first place, like file tax returns. And so it's a set of product and services for doing that. So we mostly sell to like other software companies, marketplaces, e-commerce companies, even like more like physical, like old world, like construction, retail, like those industries. Um, and so I started this company technically, I guess, about a year and a half ago, largely because I actually dealt with the problem accidentally and somewhat fell into it, somewhat didn't fall into it. But long story short, company came out of that. So we're still fairly young. It was just me, and then around like last fall, like late summer, early fall, my co-founder Steven, actually who I worked with before, joined in as my co-founder or CTO, and then we raised money, signed our first couple company customers with really no product, like early December, I guess, of last year was when this was all kind of like coming to like all coming together, and then we recruited a fairly senior team at the very beginning of this year, and then have been building and onboarding customers slowly since then. And so things are going, as much as they ever are with that early stage company. There's like even when things are going well, there's like 12 things that you're stressed about or that are not going well. But
Yeah.
things are, fingers crossed, going pretty well right now. And so yeah, there's about like I think like team of engineering and tax folks now, plus me and Steven, hiring, still doing a little bit of hiring. And so yeah, like that's where we're at. We're like seed stages, I guess you could say. Um, and so in that lead up, bridging this into where the practices have been helpful. So I raised money last fall. That was actually quite hard for me.
Mm,
And so a lot of the spiritual practices actually I like started. I've always invested in it, but I invested in it. I think I ratcheted up another level when I was getting ready to fundraise. And so to set and so that is I would say like and then I've maintained that, but through varying things since then. And so to add some color to make all of that make sense, I think with my background specifically, I've really struggled with like confidence and imposter syndrome in a way that I think everybody does this to an extent. I also, from what I can tell, talking to other people, not everyone to the extent that I do. So everybody's experience is different, but I have noticed that there's at least a good amount of people that are shocked when I tell them how much I struggle with this and have struggled with
mm,
this. And so take that for what you will. I think that's like probably related to just like I did not, I had a very probably negative self image from just how I grew up, and like lots of just like trauma, negative things, negative experiences, and just things, and then also coming from like being one of the only people really with my background, having to basically relearn different cultures, subcultures, and like I've like basically reset the context of like my social circle, my economics or like economic strata, my just like literally like so many things like several times in my life now, even like geographically where I live, that I've like a lot of reinvention, I guess you could say. And while it does take some confidence and self belief to do that, I think that's always been paired for me with like a lot of doubt. Like, can I fit into this room? Do I belong in this room? And so something even as I got into my career in tech, surrounded by people that actually went to great schools, I went to I first in my family to go to school, but like it didn't even matter because like no one had heard of like the very terrible school that I went to. People that like mostly grew up around money, like had just very different lived experiences than me, and so like like the lived experience of like college growing up like very different. And then generally just like I also think it built into my head that these like very successful people from these very prestigious schools and institutions were just better than me, and so I think I always struggled with that even early in my career in tech. To the point where it did hold me back at times. I think I often would come off unconfident at first, or at the very least, like less confident than I maybe really was in some ways. So struggle with projecting confidence early in my career probably held me back a bit. Um, and yeah, and even like in the context of wanting to start a company, I think it took me a while to build up my confidence enough to really feel like I could go for it. I think part of getting ready to start a company is like all the blocking and tackling of having skills and network and whatever. But a big part for me actually was like building up sufficient belief. And
Mm.
so anyway, I've worked on myself a lot over the years to do all of those things and do them better, especially on the being more confident, being more self-aware, not like letting this like often fear and imposter syndrome that can pop up for me, like it has been debilitating at times in my career. And so not letting that like stop me from pursuing my goals. Um, and so bringing that up to starting this company, so I mean, starting a company is just like hard, and like fundraising, especially when you like, I think for anybody it's hard and psychologically daunting. And on top of that, when it's like the amount of money that people casually raise in startups all the time is like just absurd from like my background, I just had a lot of imposter syndrome built into that. And so I was like an anxious wreck as we started to like actually start raising money. And so I really like doubled down on the investment and like, okay, I got to get my shit together if we're going to do this. Um, and then even I think the weird thing was like I did eventually get my shit together, but then even after that, it was like I thought it was like, okay, now I've solved my imposter syndrome. I'm good forever. And it didn't work out that way. It was like I hit like January, February, and I was still like I still was like struggling with it sometimes in like ways that surprised me. So I think I've at this point just settled into like I think it'll get to a point where like I'm not fighting maybe all the same battles, but I think it's either way, it's something you probably have to just keep investing in. And I'm definitely not done battling all of I think I'm a lot more confident generally than I used to be, but there's just still like there's many things this is like a never ending struggle to some extent, just managing your psychology, your emotions, even just little things. Like if I'm not like you have to even if you can be confident, like it's an ever going challenge to see things clearly, and it's very easy to not be seeing clearly because you're just like caught up into your emotions in your head and all this stuff. So yeah, long way of saying it's mostly because of like that background and the path here, and then like just how hard what I'm trying to do is and like do for our team. I don't think I would have gotten this far if I hadn't invested into all like everything from like a little bit of therapy, a lot of like just trying to like build self awareness, like build language around these things, like understand what's going on, and then like actually like meditation and spiritual practices. Like all of this has been in an effort to understand myself and then I guess be happier, be like more stable, like um
Mm.
and then more effective though. Like a lot of it is like aside from the I guess you could put aside the like I generally would like to be like a happier human being. I think purely though I would do a lot of this stuff if just for the sake that it does make me more effective.
Yeah. I would think that what you said might be so comforting for some people to hear because there is this facade of a certain persona that goes and starts a company, especially in tech, very confident, extroverted. They've got this like big belief in their vision, and they just seem so sure all the time. But in reality, all personas of people want to start companies, and many of them maybe didn't come from the same background as some of the people, or maybe like really have that imposter syndrome. And let's say even outside of tech, like a lot of people want to start companies all over the place from all different types of background. And what I love about what you said was, yes, like it still gets hard, there's still these thoughts, there's still these beliefs, there's still these emotions, but I'm just moving forward despite of it, and maybe because of it at times. Like I'm not letting it stop me, and that maybe shouldn't stop other people from even considering starting a business if that's something that you want. So what, like, I guess what advice would you give someone if they find what you're saying, these internal monologues, they're saying that's me, and I have this bigger dream, I want to achieve more. what
Yeah,
what would you say to them?
I'm always very hesitant to tell anybody to just take advice from me. I can provide anecdotal data from my experiences.
Yeah, suggestions,
Yeah,
whatever you want.
I think I think that I used to view confidence as something that would just like if you either had it or you didn't. And I think for some people that it may just work out that way. But if you are not one of those people, I think something that would have been comforting for me to know at least is that you can build it over time. Like where you start with is not where you're necessarily like set to end up. And also confidence is a spectrum. Like I think one thing that clued me into that maybe I could be more confident than I was is that I would like see myself being like surprising like I would surprise myself with how confident I could be some of the time, but it wasn't consistent. And so I think a big initial threat is like, how do I like just make that happen in more contexts and more environments, or ideally all of the time. And so I think just even knowing that like it is something you can improve, it is something you can build, and it is something that it's not so black and white would have been helpful to me. I do think there's a certain amount of just like if you struggle with it, something that at least worked for me is just to build like proof that is becomes undeniable enough that even now like something I used today is that often if I'm like there are times where I'm like doubting something that I really shouldn't doubt, like I've given myself undeniable proof that I don't need to doubt that anymore. And so, and it's actually like just giving yourself proof points to where it's not just like you saying like, oh, I can do this, but you have zero proof. Like having actual
Right.
proof that you should have reason to be confident is actually quite helpful. And you will build, it's kind of like the hard way to building confidence, but it is, if you just hammer at things and eventually give yourself like proof that can't be denied, that can be put on paper, that actually does go a long way into building confidence in a way that I think if you didn't have it supernaturally, is just going to be hard to replicate otherwise. And so I think for me, like if you're it really depends on your starting point. But if you're starting at a lower point like I was, I think I just build some undeniable proof because that you can
Yes.
kind of use that as like a starting point, and then you can
Yeah.
work on, and it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. Because if you see yourself getting better at it, you can then you can be like, well, if I am generally more confident, it's like I'd say for starting this company, it was less the ability that I believe that I could do at least like make a hell of a go at doing the thing.
Mm.
It was more of like, can I show up in every single situation and project that without like letting my fears defeat me in that moment? And so it's
Mm.
like I know I can like build this company, but maybe I'm like doubting that I can like overcome my nerves in some fundraising meeting.
Mm.
And so that's very different than like questioning the whole like, can I do this at all? Like I'd already overcome the can I do this? It was more
Mm.
of overcoming are there specific things within this that I'm maybe more concerned about. So I
Mm.
think it's something that TLDR it's built, it's a spectrum, and it's definitely like not a black and white thing.
I love that. I think I heard three steps. Well, first, accept that confidence is a skill that you can build. Number one, identify the areas that you want to build confidence in because it's a spectrum, it's different in different areas. Second thing is identify evidence points that you want to collect and practice and get better at them. And the third thing is look at the evidence that you collected and really try to rewrite that narrative in your brain. Repeat and rinse and
Totally.
repeat. That's it. That's what you said. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. And I think studying other successful people or just being around people that you think are better than you or that like you respect will just by the nature of it make you more confident.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because you are the saying you are the average of the five people you're next to. I'm butchering it, but your environment has a lot to do, has a lot to impact your confidence and the way that you speak and the way that you think. But what I'm curious about is what do you think early stage founders really need
In what way?
in maybe helping them build a confidence and build a belief and like having less nerves,
Hmm.
all the things that you talked about before. So,
Yeah.
like, really increasing their chance of being able to realize their dream.
I think the everyone's starting point is different, including like what they may or may not struggle with. Like I know folks actually that are quite good at the fundraising side of things and didn't struggle as much there, but might like just struggle in other areas instead. So I think it definitely depends. Um, I think if you're like me and you struggled with I guess like if it is more of like just some projection of like your ability to like maintain calm and like I guess projection of that confidence, the things that I found helpful. I actually would say meditation has been hugely helpful. It's just some meditative like thing I think is big. Like something that settles your mind every single day is like I think just like some kind of practice that works. It may not even be meditation, but some kind of practice that grounds you and grounds your mind, grounds your body is huge. And I think if you don't have that, it's just really hard to be steady and to be consistent. And so that is something that like I've tried many things over the years, but I've always had something consistent. And so like something consistent and disciplined there is like just it helps you build some level of baseline. And then I don't know. I think like this is more, this is very anecdotal, but for fundraising specifically, and I think I've applied it to other things as well, like recruiting, sales, whatever, is just giving less of a fuck about outcomes, what people think about you. Really a lot of like the egoic things of like, I need this to go this way, or I need this person to like me, or like I talked about this with the fund that one of the GPs at the fund that led our round. In retrospect, I think like the big switch for me with fundraising is I just like stopped giving a fuck about what any venture capitalist thought about me. And that was like a very good mental shift to get into. And so just generally thinking less actually about like what people think about you and like the outcome you're trying to get is actually quite helpful, because it's like if you're spending half your brain power going into any moment thinking about what you need to happen or what this person is thinking or will they like you or whatever, you're like using your one, you're probably really angsted up, and then two, you are most definitely not using your full self to just to like literally be yourself. And like the thing you're really actually trying to optimize for is trying to actually just be yourself, actually be the
Yeah.
best version of yourself maybe, but just still be yourself. Whereas I think it's very easy to get into, whether it's sales, recruiting, fundraising, like many of the things you have to do as a founder, it's very easy to get into the mindset of like molding yourself into what you think you need to be for this like party or this moment in front of you.
Yeah.
And there's maybe a little bit of that, but I actually think most of it is about like how do you just like most effectively be who you actually are. Um, and I think that flipping to a frame more like that was extremely helpful for me.
I love that because if you're caring about other people's expectations all the time, then there's no space to think about who you want to be. And at the end of the day, you do want people to want to work with you and want to invest in you because of who you are, and that to be like an authentic connection, right? All founders say, like, I don't just want to check, I want really great investors. I want investors who will support me, who understand our product. So I think that's a really great reframe to kind of change someone's perspective about that. And then, yeah, finding that discipline, finding that one thing that you can always go back to, almost like an oasis in the desert that you can always count on. There's going to be water to kind of quiet your mind or for whatever you're working on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. So, we've been working together this year, and I'm curious, what did you think about coaching before, and what do you think about it now?
I thought that coaching, I think I felt that coaching was like, probably mostly something that was like a very I think you do tend, it is usually something you think of for like I don't know, like large company CEOs, probably like something like that, or like executives. um and I think I thought of it as like maybe like a slightly more flexible version of therapy, even if I was being like really basic about it. And I think now, yeah, I actually don't think I had a ton of expectations of it because I didn't have much exposure or experience to it besides knowing you before and like knowing a few people that did coaching. But it's still different than like going through coaching. I think now I view it as it's kind of like having it's like having someone who's trained in a lot of different ways. It's like one, like someone who's like usually pretty aligned. I actually think it's easier to talk about almost like you specifically, but it is like because I actually don't even know like what the average coach may
True.
be like.
Yep.
But I think for you specifically, you're very good at like working with like I felt like you don't put expectations on like, well, this is what, like with therapy there's kind of like this, or even like I actually have been told some people go through this with coaching. There's very like they don't care actually what you're trying to get out of it in some ways. They like care what they have a system and they're trying to run you through their system. Whereas with you, it kind of felt like you were willing to go wherever I wanted to go and wherever I like needed to go. And like you had like different tools that could work depending on where my head was at. And so that was, so I think it's actually, it's much more flexible in that sense where it's like, especially if like the coach themselves is flexible. And I think you're very flexible because you've both clearly you're pretty well versed in like psychology and like the research there, but you're also well versed in like meditation and philosophy and spirituality and like all these other things. And then also like just pure play, like more exec coaching, like how are you going to execute the thing? And it's like, so you've kind of got like a blend of different things, which I appreciated. Cause I generally try to do the blended thing as well. And so I think why that's useful is you can direct it. Like you can direct it with wherever you're at that given time, and with wherever you're trying to go. But it's all very abstracted from like specific systems or tools. You kind of like pick and choose what works with where you're at that given moment in time. So I think that is really useful. I think it's very useful to have some sense of accountability. Like accountability comes with it, where it's you're just like there's someone you're talking to on a somewhat regular basis about just like what is actually going on in a way you feel you can be like just very brutally honest about. And it's like a consistent point of view in because if you're just maybe occasionally talking to like a friend about it or something, one, you may not be as transparent with your friend, but then two, you might it's hard to get like useful targeted feedback or just help in most contexts, whereas like this is like you've like got a constant like feedback loop of like you're seeing what's working, what's not working, and with someone who's going to like probably call you on your bullshit if you're like not being honest with yourself. And so I think that that's just like constant window and outside perspective and like guiding, often it is like kind of guiding you through your own like bullshit that it just like that's like up in your psyche. um it is very useful. So I think it's like the flexibility and tool, almost like tool agnosticism that I especially really appreciated, and the just like it's like the consistent feedback loop between like what is and is not working, combined with the context of like where you were at 2 months ago versus where you're at today is like you can kind of combine all of that, and it's very it's especially effective if you are like, I don't know that it would be that effective if you were just like doing it as like, oh, I'm gonna like people do they do this with therapy, they're like, oh, I'm gonna do therapy, and then just like it's almost like a lifestyle thing versus like I'm a person that goes to therapy, which is fine if that's you, but like versus I am getting therapy or I'm getting coaching for these specific reasons and there's like a purpose to it.
Mm,
And I think it's I found it very effective because I did slash do have a purpose to it, and it's coaching, at least with you and specifically, is like it's always very purposeful. It's not just like it's not like a laissez-faire or whatever that
yeah,
like phrase is
yeah,
type of environment or type of
yeah.
practice.
And I appreciate some of the things that you talked about. Well, yeah, I think good coaching should be purposeful. I think good therapy, it should also be purposeful in a sense. I've had a lot of experiences with therapists that are, it's almost like very, very laissez-faire. Like you said, I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, are we just, what are we talking about? And it's kind of not so focused. But I do want to talk about the part about expectations. I really am glad that you're noticing that, and that's something that's really important for me to continue to practice, is like to be able to follow your lead and to be able to really listen to what you're needing in the moment and what you're trying to get at, and not have any expectation of going to action items and improving the situation or changing someone's behavior. Because I think, well, everyone deserves to have that space, no matter if you're a CEO or not, but especially when you're a CEO, people have so many expectations of you. People are constantly projecting their idea of success and what you should do and you should not be doing onto you. That's why I think this space is so sacred. And I want to just, I mean, say to you, but also anyone who's looking for any type of friend or confidant or investor or whatever it may be. And it's harder in some of these dynamics, but it's really important to kind of suss out, what expectations does this person have of me? What agenda do they have of me? But yeah, I think a lot of coaches too, they do care a lot about their own outcome and feeling good about themselves, of a certain structure and system and doing things in a certain way. And I don't, I want to care about that. I used to care a lot more about that, but I care less about it right now because I think it's just a lot more magical that way. And the other thing that you talked about was, thought just escaped my mind. What did you, at the end you were talking about, well, maybe it's not meant to be.
Yeah,
It
yeah. I go.
My mind just
I
went.
went down like a few rabbit holes. Yeah.
No, no, it's all. Oh, okay. So that's what I was gonna ask. So basically, we were talking about having that accountability and like having that space and like being able to talk through things has been really helpful for you. Like honestly, what would you say? Like this is, what would you tell people to say that coaching may not be for you, and what kind of people would you say
Mm.
that it may be helpful for you?
I think I think if you want, and I think if you just want to like something that actually is like more, I don't want to say like a therapist, but like I think if you want if you just kind of like want someone to talk to, I think like I think coaching, sure, there's like an element of that to it, but I think it's there's probably better vectors for just like getting that done. Because I think like even if you are just like a founder that like never can just be like brutally honest about like how they feel, like there probably is some like space for, but like that's probably just like another founder friend who like you can just like call. And I have those people where it's like I can just call. Like I have a few people I can very easily text and just be like, this fucking shit is hard and it sucks, or they're like whatever, and like and you can just like kind of like be real, and like they're gonna kind of get it. And so I think there's like a space for that, but I think there's like an element of that in coaching, but I think the thing it's better for is it's better for if you like very specifically, you may not know how to get there, but you have a place that you want to end up, or like thing you want to improve at. I think coaching is like really, really good for that. And especially in a way where it's like focused. There's a there's like someone you trust, and it's like it is like focused on this thing, and because you can get, I think the feedback loop and the consistency, it's like an environment somewhat like tailed towards that outcome. It is like focused on like I actually do like want to like you usually are coming in, at least I've been coming in with like I want to improve at like this thing or these set of things, and and it's consistent though. And I think that third thing of like maybe you could like find someone to help you in a one off, or just like find an environment that's helpful in a one off with like some of that, and you can definitely work on just like I would improve at this yourself. But the feedback loop and the consistency of somebody else who's like got the outside in perspective, who talk to regularly about this specific thing, is I think maybe the like overarching thing that is like so unique to coaching that I don't think exists in a lot of other environments very easily. um because that is actually helpful in the sense that like I've worked on my shit for years, and I think the it's still like it's hard because you like you can just only you don't get the same perspective, and it's just you seeing you that you get when you're like very focused working with like another person who's consistently, that you get that like feedback loop of like what where your head was at 2 weeks ago versus where it's at like 2 weeks later, or whatever the cadence is.
Yeah. I really like what you're talking about, which is like having people in your life who are like an honest reflection of who you are, almost like a historian of where you're at. And I think that you can find it outside of just coaching, but with a coaching space. And sometimes the therapy space is a lot more focused, like you said, with the exact same goal that you laid out, and we're reflecting on that all the time. I think in a way it's like it really shows your investment and your seriousness about this goal that you're having, because you're showing up again and again, you're talking about it again and again, and you're willing to be reflected upon. I think that takes vulnerability. I think thinking about who might be listening to this, founders, leaders who are interested in growth and inner growth, and they already understand that that's a big piece in running their company. Now you've shared a ton. Like you've literally peeled an onion and showed your processes and your unique experience. Are there any things that you think might be helpful for people to hear that I haven't asked you yet?
I think, I guess, like since the audience is founders, I think that maybe you've probably already heard some version of this, but it's just like, I don't know, like I think more of us probably struggle with this than admit. And so it's like relatively, I don't know, if like you're just like, if it's like very hard for you to manage your shit, like it's like maybe you're not the only one, I guess. Um, and then I don't know. I just think it's like it's all like anything that's ever worked for me has just come with like a lot of trial and error, and it's like a very personal journey. I think one thing that's frustrating at times about like this space of this set of things is that there's lots of people trying to throw playbooks and things of that nature out there, and realistically it's like a very very personal journey. There's like probably no one specific thing that's going to work unilaterally, so it's more about finding things that
Yeah.
work, or at least work right now, and it's like resonance, like did this work or not for me, and
Yes.
it's going to be a personal journey no matter what you do.
Yes, I want to really second that. I think it's not only applying to this area of things of emotional, mental, spiritual things, but also in running a business. There's so many books out there. Anything that's ever original about how to run a business, how to build a team, strategy, it's probably out there. It's already been written. But building a business and choosing to start something that is has inherent risk is already a personal journey. And at the end of the day, no matter who tells you what to do, even if your coach or therapist tells you that this is the right thing, you should really question it. And it is a lonely journey in that way, but I think it could also be deeply connecting when you find people who share some of these same commitment to themselves, and you find people who truly support you in that. But in that sense, You are alone, but you're also not alone because we're all going through it together.
Yeah, yeah, that's well said.
I love it. Okay, cool. And is there anything in particular, if people are hearing this and they find themselves wanting to reach out to you, anything specific that you're wanting to hear from people about?
Um, no, I don't think so. I think I'm fairly approachable slash accessible on the internet. So like I don't know, like my life is decently out there at this point. So I think I'm on like LinkedIn, Twitter, or like the places that um pretty easy to DM me there. You can also just like my email's not that hard to find, so you could like find me that way. And yeah, I generally like I'm either extremely fast in responding or extremely slow. So don't feel bad about following up with me. It just probably got lost in the shuffle if I don't respond.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then we'll put your social links in the show notes and on the screen so people can easily find you. But thank you so much for making time for this. And I mean, extra appreciated because we already meet on a regular basis and you're taking out extra time. And this means a lot to me. And I'm so grateful for everything that you've shared.
No, I appreciate you having me. I was honored that you asked, and hopefully something here is helpful. Yeah, and again, if anybody's listening to this and this is like I don't know, like an area that you just want, like, just shoot me a note if you have like questions about anything I'm trying, or just want to know that another founder actually like finds some of this stuff hard. Like I'm easy to get a hold of. You should work with Sabrina. Sabrina's great. And yeah, thank you for having me. Honored that you asked me to be on.
Oh, thank you so much. And you already helped me. I think that's like having this conversation with you already helped one person because I feel so hopeful that people like you are out there and who are committed in doing this work. And every time I hear someone who's trying these things, it reminds me to try harder to work on my things. So thank you for that. You already helped me.
Of course.
All right.